Climb into the cockpit with pilot and LinkSquares Chief Legal Officer Tim Perilla as he invites legal leaders aboard to share advice that will help you navigate even the most turbulent times of in-house counsel work. We'll cover a range of topics from data privacy to legal team structure to public company transactions and beyond. You don't want to miss this series. Fasten your seatbelt and prepare for takeoff. You're listening to Cockpit Counsel.
Welcome to another episode of Cockpit Counsel. Really excited about this one today. This is our first episode of Cockpit Counsel where we're live and have a great friend, Ari Buchler here, who is just an incredible professional, amazing career, and we're going to talk and try to get some insights about Ari's career and some advice that he has for in-house counsel who are coming up. So, without any further ado, Ari, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us briefly just a little bit about yourself. You know, where you grew up.
Sure.
What brought you to Boston, and what you're doing right now.
Great. This is a 4-hour episode.
That's
okay.
That's affirmative, sir.
So actually, I was born in Boston, in Dorchester, and then when I was a young child, moved to Israel with my family, and was there till 1986. Did my military service and came back to the States. My extended family was here in Boston, so Boston was a natural location to come to. But eventually, I ended up in New York, both for undergrad and for law school. Started out working at Skadden Arps, corporate finance department, which is a great experience,
Yeah.
and eventually moved into GC roles, which became a succession of GC roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about that transition from Skadden into your first in-house role, and what level was your first in-house role?
Sure. So the transition from Skadden, I think was easier than in some cases, just because of the volume of work that you are exposed to in a large law firm. It's a mixed blessing, of course, in terms of the time commitment, but when you work, you're surrounded with some other very talented mentors and leaders. So going into an in-house position, I think I was very well equipped to tackle deals that might be more complex. My background was in corporate finance and M&A primarily, and some corporate work. So the transition to commercial contracts was a little bit of a ramp to go through. My first in-house role was at a company called then Connors Publishing, eventually Reed Business Information.
Yeah.
B2B publisher. And the interesting part of it, so this was mid-90s, it was really a time where businesses were transitioning from their old business model to the internet. This is a B2B publisher. And so it was really interesting to be part of a business and really help bring a legal perspective to that transition from printed content and an advertising business to an online business.
Right. So as far as publishing, were they was it primarily content creation, or was it the actual physically getting blue lines and like producing print production?
So this was the industry itself was a series of vertical B2B publications.
Okay.
The primary source of revenue is, of course, advertising revenue.
Yeah.
There's also an associated conference business. And it really was a lot of IP work. So getting exposed to both content IP and marketing IP, and again, trademarks, copyright, which I had not dealt with before, but luckily had some colleagues there who had and helped me kind of get on that ramp. But this is traditional, magazines.
Yeah.
My favorite title of all of them will always be Cheese Market News, which was no surprise, a Wisconsin publication, and it just sticks in my mind as a very targeted audience.
That's why I can't believe we haven't talked about this before. So my first exposure to in-house legal work, I was a law clerk. Do you remember the entertainment coupon books?
Which was
entertainment, the coupon books.
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yes. I interned in the legal department at that company.
Oh my God,
when I was in law school, which was pretty wild. And sifting through merchant agreements is basically all advertising, right?
Right.
And it was a lot of fun. That's crazy though. I didn't realize you were in publishing, but
Well, I think one of the interesting things about that time also is people didn't know what to do with the internet. So I remember literally drafting a linking agreement. Today you just throw a link on somebody's webpage and everything says, but in those days people thought, oh, we need to have an agreement to allow a link on another page. So it really was an interesting time, that evolution, onto the web, which of course has continued now for the past few decades. But being part of that transition into business is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how long were you there, and sort of how did you grow with that company, and what was your next step?
So I was there for about 3 years. And again, one of the great things about that opportunity is that I got exposed to many areas, not only of law, but also business that I'd never dealt with before. The examples are IP, copyright, but then, constructing partnerships, a lot of M&A work. We did a lot of buying and a lot of selling, which I had done, but I'd done it as an outside advisor. Of course, being in-house, it's a very different experience. You're much closer to the business. You have a much better understanding of the business considerations that are relevant, not just kind of the legal points. And so working with a team of, other lawyers and a general counsel, became exposed to other areas that eventually became relevant, not just for legal work, but other areas of work that I've transitioned into.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was the next step on your journey?
So from there, I came into my first executive legal role, which is a small startup. I came in as general counsel. A company had built the first web-based clinical trial system. It was a Boston-based company. Yeah. Fewer than 90 people, had just started revenue. My first management meeting, I found out we had 2 weeks of cash, which was a great dinner conversation at home that night. Today, I think 2 weeks, plenty of time to go raise money. Yeah. And there I came in. I think the expectation is often the expectation, or I should say used to be the expectation in a lot of companies, is we're bringing in a legal or a general counsel to help with contracts or to cut our legal bills. And I think I think today most companies do not take that view. I think it's a very outdated view, but we're talking, 20 odd years ago, that was the predominant view of why you bring somebody in-house.
Right.
I think the legal profession, the in-house profession has certainly evolved tremendously, giving general counsels and legal function, a seat at the table on the C-suite, which is very, very different than when it was when I started. Okay. I was fortunate to work both with management team and board members who saw significant value in having an in-house counsel. So they had no desire to just have legal deal with contracts. They had really expectations and a desire to help the company with governance, to really take the company down that roadmap of an eventual IPO. So the company did grow. We did a bunch of financing rounds, but eventually did IPO on the NASDAQ. Yeah. We did a secondary in the NASDAQ, and then eventually the company was acquired by Oracle in 2010. Nice. I stayed there longer than I ever thought I would. I was there for 11 years. But again, being in that GC role and having visibility of kind of the entire trajectory of a company from early stage startup to public company was really a unique experience. And the GC role really is, I think, one of the few roles in the company, aside maybe from a CFO, that has visibility to all functions in a company and works with all functions. And it puts the GC in a unique position to really learn a lot from their executive peers across the functional landscape.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So let's talk a little bit about growing your team there. Obviously, it wasn't just you there for 11 years. No. And coming in when you're running on fumes from a cash perspective, I'm sure you were doing the heavy lifting, everything from reviewing NDAs to helping prepare board meetings for at least the first little while on your own. Yeah. What was your approach at that time? If you were to, put yourself back in that position, what was your approach then? And in terms of how you wanted to build out your team, how you did build out your team versus if you were doing that again today, how would you do it a little differently? So
I had a label printer, which I nicknamed my paralegal. That was my first investment, and then a scanner. Yeah. And I think, again, when you come into a company, whether you're the first in-house counsel, which I was, or you're coming into an established role, reaching out, establishing relationships, but also using those conversations to kind of gather information, just, on what the company is doing. In my case, maybe it's a little easier at the time because we were just starting out. So, it wasn't hard for me to find out where all the commercial contracts are. They were not all in one place. Get a handle on that. Trying to establish a system, even though, I was the system, but that could grow. So not something that was useful to me, but would not be useful if somebody else came in. And as far as growing the team, I think, in an executive role, I think it's very important to keep in mind that kind of duality of the executive role and then the tactical operational support you need to give to other functions. Mm-hmm. And over time, as an executive, I think you need to aspire to create sort of a leadership function and then build out that support function for the other parts of the company, because ultimately you are building a service business within a company.
That's right.
You have your own client base. You have your own responsibility really to educate people in the company on your services. So I consider that sort of internal marketing, getting involved in other functions. And so I think as the company grows, you really need to look at where the strongest needs are. Now, in most cases, I think in a B2B SaaS company, the immediate needs are going to emerge in the commercial side. Yeah. So really building out a team that can support the sales team and partner with the sales team. So that, of course, that is where the first investment was. But then from a team growth perspective, giving opportunities for those commercial lawyers to then grow into other areas and help them develop expertise in, again, IP, marketing, trademark, M&A, in addition to sort of their primary responsibility of making sure that we're closing deals and supporting the business.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing that I didn't do early on, was make sure that every attorney I hired spent time in the contracts. Mm-hmm. And, and I think, just being a little bit self-reflective on it, I probably did a couple of those folks a little bit of a disservice as mm-hmm. far as professional development. I think if you're going to operate in-house and you're going to operate in-house at the highest levels, then you need to be able to understand that aspect of the business, mm-hmm. whether it's B2C or whether it's B2B.
Right.
Your contracts are a massive source of what your responsibility is. I tell people all the time when I think about the legal function, and think about why contracts is so important, mm-hmm. even though even now today, the number of contracts that I review on a monthly or a quarterly basis is very, very, very small, mm-hmm. right? Right. Maybe 2, right? That sort of thing. Thankfully, because I have a great team that's able to do that. But why do I still think that that's most important, even though at the highest level, that's not what's consuming my time every day? Is because if you don't have an understanding of that, you just can't possibly understand the way that the business either spends its money right. or receives its money. And right. if you can't do that and you're an attorney for the company, you're not going to be very effective, I think.
No, I think that's right. I think no doubt that was a transition as well. Even going from read business information into my executive role at Phase Forward, the first NDA I marked up, I probably aged the sales VP by about 5 years. Luckily, we built a relationship, and I managed to kind of tone it down really to where it needed to be for a commercial contract versus right. an M&A deal. Mm-hmm. But I also had the opportunity to learn a lot from that sales exec and other sales execs along the way, where eventually I actually ran a sales team for a $20 million business in software and in cybersecurity in a different company later. Yeah. And the thought that somebody from a legal background would actually run a sales team, not the first thing that jumps to mind. But it really, and I think this goes back to the opportunities that GCs have to really learn from peers and create sort of a value add mentality that goes beyond being a legal provider. So one of the goals I had always set for myself and my team is to become go-to people. Yeah. Even if we don't have the answer, we can help try and get to the answer. We will be creative. We will, if we can't give the answer that somebody wants, they can walk away knowing, okay, we made a good faith effort. We've exhausted the options. More often than not, we can get to the answer, right? And it's a matter of, again, understanding what's unique about that business, getting comfortable with some risk taking. As far as that, understanding the role of a GC as a mentor, that takes time. Because I think at least for me, when you start out as an executive role, you're drinking from a fire hose.
Right.
And as time goes on, you start to benefit from you start to realize the benefits of prior mentorship and also learning from your peers in different functional areas. And then you realize, okay, I have responsibility to do the same for my team, but it's not an overnight thing. And then you get to the point where somebody runs into your office, somebody in your department runs into your office with their hair on fire, panicking, and you get to be the one to say, don't worry about it, it's fine. Whereas 10, 15 years before, you'd be the one running in with your hair on fire.
Yeah.
And that is, again, that perspective that you gain over time as being a GC, building out a team, and getting to see the relative risks and benefits of taking certain positions in negotiations with customers or vendors for that matter. Yeah,
absolutely. There's definitely an aspect of the not only the years of experience, but the experience in the years to bring that perspective and understand when it's time to panic internally while remaining calm externally.
Right.
And when to just say, okay, I know this isn't going to be a big deal, even though it may seem like it. So very interested in understanding the path that took you from being GC then into running the sales team and starting to branch out and overseeing a bit more on the business side.
So after Phase Forward, I took some time. I thought, gee, the startup thing is really easy. So I actually worked in a startup with a technical co-founder. And after about 9 months of really having fun building a prototype, he remembered his son's in college. I realized my daughter's about to go to college. We said, this startup thing's not for us. We have tuition to pay. So I did go back into the workforce in a normally employed fashion. I have done a number of private equity backed companies, mostly turnarounds. And in one of the companies, Sophos, which is a cybersecurity company headquartered out of the UK, although they were searching for a GC, once I met with the CEO who had been brought in to really turn the company around, he identified other roles where I could support the company, and those were head of corp dev and M&A, and running an OEM licensing business, which is more strategic licensing. So your technologies are getting embedded in other parties' technologies. So it's different from sort of your direct to customer or your sales strategy, but it's still having a P&L actually is not something that lawyers normally have in a company. And again, it just brings a whole new perspective. I think coming with a philosophy that your legal team is a service organization and having, thinking about it as if it were P&L, right? With, where do you spend your capital and so on, certainly helped take on a business role where it wasn't much of a change of orientation, still very customer oriented, working with a sales team, working with a product management team to position your offerings for customers. And of course, negotiating those deals, with the strategic objectives in mind, but at the same time, having to try and do some of the legal points as well. I did normally try to separate. So if I was functioning as head of that unit, I would tend to try and have somebody in my team do the contract, just so I'm not, doing both.
Yeah, exactly. It helps you to kind of keep your perspective where it needs to be, and especially with a lot of the legal work, like if you've got good people on your team, you can trust them to worry about the legal stuff for you, and chase that down. That's excellent.
Yeah, I have to say, on the people side, I've just been fortunate, both in terms of people that I've worked with an executive or worked for as CEO, and also people I've recruited. I've been pretty fortunate. In most cases, people I've worked with even 20 years ago are still among my close friends. And I've also been given the opportunity by them to help continue to participate in their careers, whether it's just by career advice or introducing them to new roles. And that's not something I think you think about in your day-to-day job as a GC. but it's a takeaway you get to have, and it has selfishly is a lot of satisfaction in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with the career development, I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times, is you're now completely out of operating as a legal executive, and you're exclusively on the business side, and would love for you to talk a little bit about specifically what you're doing now. But for attorneys who are in maybe the middle of their in-house career and thinking like, what's next for me? I'm really embracing the business side, but I still have this lawyer thing that I have to, in some ways overcome in order to be really viewed as a true business partner, as a business professional, as my core competency. How do you start walking down that path, and what advice do you give to people who are interested in moving that direction?
Well, I think it's a great question, and a question again I also get quite a bit. I think that if you aspire to be in an executive role as a legal professional who's not yet in the executive role, I think you have to take a very broad view of your role. Your role continues to be, of course, to help manage the company's risk. But we're living in a world where it's not about risk elimination, it's about risk management and risk mitigation, and weighing that risk against the benefits of the company. So there are concessions you'll make for a 7-figure deal that you're not going to make for a 5-figure deal. And I think that's where you really need to think and not treat every deal the same way, and take a more of a business-oriented view. We're all, again, trying to close business. And then I think with that is also that appreciation for growing in your role, also as an educator, whether it's for people in the legal function or people outside the legal function. I think the more people understand, and I've had this feedback from salespeople, marketing people, just understanding why we take certain positions just makes it a lot easier. It also makes it a lot easier for them to help support, legal. Instead of saying, well, legal doesn't let me, they can say, well, we don't do that. We don't accept unlimited liability. And I think I think it has a huge impact even in interacting with customers. And then as you allow yourself to really take in more knowledge, information from other functions to see how it all relates to yours, it also allows them to contribute further. And once you enter into that executive role, I've tended to see that as a pretty big flip, where at that point you are first and foremost an executive, just like any other function, and you are responsible for a particular function. And tomorrow you might have another function brought under you that you don't even have experience in, and I've had that happen. But because of your leadership skills, because of your knowledge of the business, you might be given another function to manage, and that's really an opportunity again to divorce or at least apply your management and leadership skills outside of an area of your expertise. And I think that's one of the greatest transitions you can do as a GC or a lawyer. And I think it's one that if you really want to grow as an executive, you should be actively seeking out, as opposed to, as I did at times, trying to shy away from, thinking, I don't want another function. But then once you have it, it's really a great opportunity to then flex those other non-legal muscles in a business and leadership setting.
One of the things that I found is I oversee the IT function, the people function, and operations here, as well as the legal function. And one of the things that I found that's extremely refreshing is that I'm absolutely not a subject matter expert in the people function or the IT or the operations side. And so I've had to hire people who, and then just trust. Yes. Right. Hire and trust. And I found that it's actually, despite knowing that my legal function leadership is extremely strong and extremely capable, I have more trouble letting go of that one than just being able to say, okay, I agree with you. Ask the questions that you need to ask so it makes sense, and try to get everything put into the broader perspective of the business. But then saying, okay, like, you can go and execute. Let me know what I can do to help you.
Right.
Right. That's really hard for me to do in the legal function, but it's been refreshingly easy to do on the others. Wondering if you kind of felt the same way, or if it was maybe a little bit different for you.
It's really a good question. I guess I don't know that I had a hard time letting go, because again, generally when I was maybe lucky with hiring, or I brought in people that I felt we're eager to grow, we're eager to learn more, we're eager to take on more. And I got to a point where, more tactically than strategically, not letting go, where somebody bring an issue and I'd start saying, oh, well, you could say this, or you could write that. And then I eventually learned to catch myself and say, I don't like it when people tell me what to write in an email. And that's what I'm doing. I'm telling somebody else how to respond. Or like, no, to your point, take this position and let them run with it, and I'll catch myself and say, why am I telling you what to write? You're going to write an email that's at least as good, if not better than what I would write.
Right.
Once you've decided on the issue, run with it, and that's, I think, an empowering thing for people. And to your point, not everybody, I think, can let go. I think it's really incumbent on the GC to not only be successful, but to make their team successful, to be able to let go. And it may be a risk for the GC, right? Because if something blows up, it will come back to you. Yeah. But that can't be what drives you to always be involved. Part of your success is measured by how the people you hired or you manage handle things. And if they handle it well, that's a good reflection of you. If they don't, then you do have some responsibility for that. And I think it's, unfortunately, lawyers can be risk averse, as we all know. And I think that's sometimes where it's hard to let go. But I think once you do, you'd be surprised just how the world doesn't come to an end, actually.
Yeah, one of the things that really helped me, and Jonathan, our VP of Legal, just joined back in October. And so one of the things that really helped me was one day I just came to this realization. I was kind of joking with my wife about it. I was like, I don't know why he's not doing things exactly the same way that I do them in my head, but I haven't told him anything that's going on in my head yet. Mm-hmm. And we both just kind of laughed about it. And I was like, okay, there's more than one way to be successful, and there's more than one way to go about this. And like, Jonathan is extremely capable, and has proven himself to be just an outstanding leader and an outstanding partner to the team here. And while some of the things may not be exactly the way that I would do them per se, some of them are better than the way that I've done them historically, and ultimately is getting an outstanding result. And so that's been something that's really helped me sort of feel very comfortable with understanding that I can't spend 45% of my time in the legal function any longer,
And I think to an earlier point you made about trust in other function is you basically come to trust people's judgment. And,
that's right.
And again, in an area where it can be hard to resist temptation, there have been cases where I have seen somebody run something by me a way they want to do it. And the one thing you don't want to do is have them, if you're always changing it, then they end up feeling they have to run everything by you. So even if I might do it differently, especially, of course, if it's not a big issue, I might let them kind of run with it. And after they're done, we might have a conversation about, other way, and it's clear to them that it's not a criticism of the decision. It's an opportunity to, for us both to analyze, but also to let them know that I trust your judgment. I'm intentionally not telling you. And I had a lawyer work with me in a few companies ago who would bring everything to me. Right. And at some point I said, that's just not going to work, and I said, when you hit the steel door and you can't figure out an issue, then come to me. But if you're, just trying to get through issues and usually it's just a matter of like kicking down the door and kind of getting further down the hall. Maybe it's not a perfect analogy or metaphor, but and eventually she realized she could not make those decisions, and she realized it just wasn't a role for her because she preferred, and she had come from a background where she did work what I'll call a little more prescribed, like they have very strict kind of rules in what they did. And so when it came to encouraging her to make decisions, take risks, she realized herself that she wasn't comfortable with it. And she came at some point and said, yeah, I'm not for me.
And that's incredible to have that level of self-awareness to actually say like, okay, this is, because a lot of people will shut down and be like, oh, so like my boss is doing this wrong, like pointing the finger elsewhere, and instead of taking that a time of reflection to say like, okay, is this really the right role? Is this really where I'm going to be most successful from a career standpoint? So I know we've been going back and forth, but I think we may have some questions from the audience here. Alyssa, is there, did we get any questions during the time?
So we have a question about LinkSquares, the how, when, why that you got involved.
Okay, so the question was, Ari, being a very, very early investor in LinkSquares, tell us the story. How, when, why did you get involved?
So one of the things I've done in between companies is a little investing, looking at different companies. And I've generally gravitated towards companies that had they existed 10, 15, 20 years ago, my life would have been a lot more relaxed. I would have more hair and it would be darker. And LinkSquares fit squarely into that category. So I met Vishal and Chris in, I think it was mid to late 2016. And they told me what they wanted to build. And how come this hasn't existed all this time? But I think there are a few things that I think made them stand out compared to other companies that I've seen. One is the fact that they had really thought through the issue, and they had talked to a lot of people. And I think one of the biggest challenges is when people sometimes try and build a solution for somebody else's industry.
Yeah.
And I learned from Phase 4, the company that built the clinical trial system, the person that started the company was in the clinical research space, and his co-founder was in the computing space. So they knew the industry and they understood the problems. I think that Chris and Michelle did a great job understanding really, the proverbial pain points, or really understanding what they were, but took it beyond that, right? Where it's not just a point solution that's going to solve an immediate issue. It's something that, you can grow with the product. As the product functionality grows, you'll be able to grow with the product. A lot of people like to bet on serial entrepreneurs. That for me wasn't really an issue. I just thought they had the right DNA, the right chemistry, the right approach, and really persuaded me that they understood the issue and that they were going to tackle it in earnest. And that in the it wasn't one meeting. I spoke to them for a while, and just every meeting showed how much more they were diving into the issues and understanding what the problems were that they were going to solve. And they've demonstrated that throughout the product roadmap development. There are products and features in the product today that were not in the original roadmap because customers said, hey, we need this, or I don't have a solution for that. And that ability to listen to customers and just say, yeah, I meant to do just this, but my customers say we need that. Well, let's make those adjustments. Again, that's not as common as I think you'd like it to be when you're buying software. And I think that's another area where they certainly have excelled. And sometimes you just meet people and you think, I want to somehow be involved with what they're doing. And I think for both of them, that was kind of the case with me. I just thought, they're going to be doing something exciting. Now, granted, I've had the same experience with other companies that are not doing nearly as well.
Yeah.
But I just felt this is a really good connection. And I've had the good fortune of also along the way being able to act as an advisor, whether it's occasionally a product, whether it's occasionally on helping introduction to potential customers, and whether it's occasionally just a call, from Vishal about fundraising or something like that. And again, that just it's just a fun part of being involved in a company like this.
Yeah. So you touched on it. You're in the investment space now. What are you doing? What do you love about it? And how has your legal career helped you in your day in and day out now, if at all?
So I think the legal career absolutely helps because, through my legal career is where I really got involved and started out with really corporate finance and M&A. I tend to like that kind of work. Some might say I have a short attention span, and deals lend themselves to violent execution. And
Sure.
I think violent execution can outweigh, careful planning many times.
Oh, yeah.
So I gravitated towards liking deal work. I think it also works well when you're doing commercial deals where you can move more quickly. And so through my various GC roles, I've always had additional roles. I've run HR functions, alliance functions, as I managed a sales team, mentioned a sales team, but M&A and corp dev have also been a natural kind of fit.
Yeah.
So through that, I've done, I've done probably about 50 deals, and then been involved in probably a few hundred evaluations and target evals. And so over time, doing more and more of that, especially in the cybersecurity industry, where I spent a number of years at Sophos, I just really became part of an ecosystem of bankers and investors. And I just love looking at companies. I'm always thrilled to talk to entrepreneurs, hear what they're doing. And through some interactions, was introduced to a private equity firm who had come from a media communications background and tech-enabled and managed services background. And they were interested in porting that experience, their investment experience, into the data security space. We got introduced through a mutual acquaintance and investment banker we knew, and just started brainstorming around some ideas. They had already started working in a thesis. And so again, not like a grand plan, but I just started working with them. And now it's a little over 3 years later where I've evaluated hundreds of companies with them. I'm on the board of one of the companies in cybersecurity that we've made an investment in. And I also work with other portfolio companies outside of cybersecurity. When it comes to getting deals done, looking at term sheets, certainly my deal and legal background come into play. I'm not negotiating them. They have outside lawyers,
Right.
but I may have terms that I've seen in prior deals that I've done that, may make sense to introduce or even help kind of think about how we respond to a certain point from the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see Alyssa again. I think we've got more questions coming in.
We have one more.
All right.
What is the best career advice you ever got?
Ooh, that's always a tough one. So I'm going to say one of the best career pieces of career advice I got was actually not advice at all. It was a question I was asked, and I'll never know the answer because I finished college or law school. And again, I started school when I was older. I worked full-time during college. And I met somebody on Fifth Avenue walking outside near Central Park. And this gentleman in a suit stopped and asked for directions. We started chatting. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "Are you maybe looking for a job? Would you like to come work with me?" And I said, I just got a job, so no, thank you.
Yeah.
And today, I still sit here, this is 30 something years later, thinking I'll never know the answer. I'll never know what it was.
Right.
So I think, the career advice is, just always be curious.
Yeah.
And you don't want to live a life of constantly looking for a job.
Right.
But if you're constantly looking for ways to really grow yourself, the interesting jobs will come your way.
Right.
And so where I am today is not part of a grand plan. I love doing GC work. I also love doing deal work. And I love the people I'm working with right now. And so, but it wasn't part of a grand plan. It was part of kind of the story that I've told through this conversation about having the opportunity to work with some really smart and people who are generous with their time to help me grow. And likewise, being given the opportunity to help other people grow, you actually learn a lot about yourself mentoring other people.
Yeah.
But I think, that conversation, my kids have heard that story too many times. I'm sure at this point they're like, okay, Dad, shut it off. But it's just, it's a reminder to just be curious. Even if it's not your core function. I think you're experiencing this.
Sure.
Get the right people and continue to learn and continue to develop.
All right. So theme of the show is Cockpit Counsel. As we've talked about, I'm a pilot.
Yes.
I love to fly. I have pre-flight rituals for when I'm flying versus when, JetBlue or somebody else is flying. Very, very different pre-flight rituals. But do you have any pre-flight ritual?
For when I fly? Or
Yeah.
For,
yeah.
I'm about to go to the RSA conference, a cybersecurity conference out in San Francisco next week, and it's the first live one since February 2020.
Yep.
And I was the crazy guy flying back from San Francisco, wiping down my table and wearing a mask. So that was my pre-flight flight ritual, kind of remains it today. I really enjoy flying. So my pre-flight ritual is, when I'm make sure my book, and I still read a book, and I read heavy books.
Yeah.
Have my book ready, have my headphones ready. And once I settle in, I can kind of get into a zone in a plane, enjoy it, get a lot of reading done, and some music and noise canceling headphones. So it's just making sure I have those tools ready for me for takeoff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I mean, for me, if I'm the one flying, I look at it and say, all right, it's got wings and it looks like the engine seems okay. Make sure there's some gas and electricity and you're good. Just kidding. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But, and then, usually mine is if I get to the airport early enough, I love to grab a drink and then get my my music playlist set up on my phone first, so that as soon as I get in and sit down, I can pop in the earbuds and it won't have to be sitting there pecking at my phone trying to shuffle, or even worse, if you don't have Wi-Fi, make sure everything's downloaded. Right?
Yes. I make people I stress out people who travel with me a little bit, because I don't feel the need to get to the airport really early.
Yeah.
So to a lot of people, it feels like it's really cutting it. And in however many decades of traveling, once my name was being called to come to the gate, but I think that's a pretty good average. That's another ritual, just kind of trying to time everything perfectly.
Pre-check is a game changer.
Yeah.
Absolute game changer. I'm the same way. If I have to sit any longer than 15, 20 minutes before boarding, I'm disappointed with myself. So, but Ari, thanks so much. This has been absolutely awesome. Really appreciate you taking the time to
Thanks for having me.
sit down. So,
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.